Tesla and hello everybody. This is the second clip on the first chapter of yours, that is Cold War and the non-aligned movement. In the first clip, we talked about the emergence of two power blocks, the reasons for the Cold War, and the reasons for the alliances as well. Now, in this clip, we'll be discussing about how these alliances were consolidated through different pacts, the arms race, and the treaties between the two superpowers, that is United States and the USSR. So let's get started.
This is a European map during the Cold War taken from your textbook. Because of the reasons for formation of alliances, which I just mentioned above, the division which started from Europe. Europe was divided into two alliances. The yellow color, that is the Western Alliance under the United States, and the red color, that is the Eastern Alliance under the USSR. Now, if you look at the key, the yellow color is marked as NATO members, the red as the Warsaw Pact members. Now, what does that mean? Well, the alliances were unified and strengthened through military pacts. Okay, a pact that talks about joint military actions or bringing together the armed forces in case of any crisis. So NATO was, of course, a pact of Western Alliance, and Warsaw of USSR. Let's look at these pacts in a little more detail. So as I just mentioned, the alliances were consolidated through pacts: NATO, Warsaw, CA2, and CENTO. Now, the full form of NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So this organization was formed by the Western Alliance, comprising of 12 states, in April 1949. Okay, it declared that, now this is important, this pact declared that armed attack on any one of the 12 members at that time would be considered as an attack on all of them. Okay, so this treaty established a military alliance. Its headquarters is based in Brussels, Belgium. Then second one we have is the Warsaw Pact. The Eastern Alliance, led by the Soviet, was known as the Warsaw Pact. Now, this was a treaty signed between 8 countries in Poland in 1955. It was officially called the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. Actually, its main function was to counter NATO's forces in Europe. We then have CA2 and CENTO. Now, both these alliance systems were built by the United States. CA2, or the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, as you can see in the map of CA2 members, was targeted, as the name suggests, Southeast Asia. The CENTO, or the Central Treaty Organization, which is also known as the Baghdad Pact, was targeted at West Asia, or the Middle East and Central Europe. Okay. Now, it is said that the World War II came to an end with the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 by the United States. Now, this led to a huge controversy because the critics of the United States were of the view that United States wanted to show that they are superior than Soviet, and that they threw the bomb on purpose, since they did not want the Soviet to make any political and military gains in Asia. However, the United States supporters, now they say that the dropping of bombs were necessary on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to stop the Second World War. Now, whatever the reasons may be, now this led to a huge arms race. Each bloc was suspicious of the other, and then they started making more deadlier weapons than the other to prevent war. Huge amount of money was spent on building nuclear weapons. Both the power possessed enough nuclear power to destroy the other, but they dare not wage a war. Why? Okay, now this was because of logic of deterrence. Now, what is logic of deterrence? Logic of deterrence is an ideology developed by the superpowers which deters or which stops. Deterrence, deter, which meaning stop, right? So this ideology which was developed by the superpowers, it deters or it stops the superpowers from entering into hot wars, since the cost of the war will be so high that it will be impossible to declare one side or the other winner, because both the powers have the capacity to retaliate against an attack and cause so much destruction that neither of the two powers can afford to start a war. So the key points here to remember is that logic of deterrence is avoidance of hot wars. Why? Because both the powers have the capacity to retaliate against the attack. Both the powers have enough nuclear weapons to retaliate against the attack. And then in the course of a hot war, both the powers will be completely destroyed. So the cost of the war will be so high and no one will actually benefit from that war. So both the powers will be so destroyed that it will be impossible to declare a winner. Okay. Now, one thing that we must keep in our mind is that even if the logic of deterrence helps in avoidance of war, it, however, doesn't end their rivalry. All right. So the power blocks therefore stayed restrained or in control in order to avoid the war. But they understood that war might occur in spite of restraint. So they decided to collaborate and signed treaties in limiting and controlling certain nuclear and non-nuclear arms. Okay, so it's kind of like strange. First they built up huge amount of arms, and then they decide to control and reduce the arms. Anyway, now some of the arms control treaties were the Limited Test Ban Treaty, Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, SALT I and SALT II, and START I and START II. So the first one, the Limited Test Ban Treaty or the LTBT Treaty, was signed by the United States, the United Kingdom and the USSR in Moscow on 5th August 1963. Now this treaty banned nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, in outer space and underwater. Okay. Now, many a times the name of the treaty itself will tell you what it is all about. As in here, Limited Test Ban Treaty. So the treaty banned and limited the testing of nuclear weapon. You just need to remember the where. That's it. So the same can be applied to other treaties as well. Okay, now let's move on to the next one. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, proliferation means to increase or spread, right? So this treaty is about the non-increase of nuclear weapons. How? Well, this treaty allows only the nuclear weapon states to have nuclear weapons, and it stops others from acquiring nuclear weapons or acquiring them. Now the next question would be, who is a nuclear weapon state? Okay, so a nuclear weapon state is a state who has manufactured or exploded a nuclear weapon or any other nuclear explosive device before 1st January 1967. Okay, so as per this explanation, there are only 5 nuclear weapon states, and those are United States, USSR, Britain, France, and China. The treaty was signed in Washington, London, and Moscow on 1st July 1968. and then it got extended indefinitely in 1995. Of course, this is an unfair treaty, and that was the reason why India didn't sign this treaty. Next we have is the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks 1 and Talk 2, that is SALT 1 and SALT 2. Now, under the SALT 1 treaty, United States and Soviet leaders signed in 1972 the Anti-Ballistic Missile, or the ABM Treaty, which was on the limitation of anti-ballistic missile systems and limitation on strategic offensive arms. The SALT II Treaty, which was signed in 1979, was on the limitation on strategic offensive arms. This treaty was signed between the United States and the USSR. Okay. Then we have the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or the START 1 and START 2, signed again respectively in 1991 and 1993. And this treaty was on the reduction and limitation on strategic offensive arms. The treaty was signed, of course, between the United States and the USSR. You'll find about all these treaties in your textbook, okay? Before I end this clip, let's do a quick recapitulation. So in this clip, we learned about how the division of the world into two alliances started from Europe, and how these alliances were consolidated through various pacts. The USA started NATO, CATO, and CENTO, all with two at the end. That's, in that way it'll be easier to remember. And the USSR with Warsaw Pact. You should remember the full form of all these abbreviations, okay? We then talked about how the dropping of bomb by the United States on Japan's Hiroshima and Nagasaki became controversial, and how it led into arms race between the two superpowers, which led to the logic of deterrence and the policy of restraint. We finally learned about how, despite the policy of restraint, since there was a possibility of war, the two superpowers decided to collaborate, which led to various arms reduction and limitation treaties, such as the LTBT, the NPT, SALT 1, SALT 2, and the START 1 and START 2. So that's it. It's a short and an easy topic. However, as I mentioned earlier, you must learn all the abbreviations, as it usually comes in 1-mark questions. Alright, so in the next clip, I'll be covering the non-aligned movement, which is a very important topic. So until then, stay safe and take care, and I'll see you in my next clip, okay? Bye-bye.